we begin the 10th perek, which moves to hafarat nedarim. Beforehand, we were talking about hatarat nedarim, in which one undoes a vow based on a petach. You say, oh, did you realize the circumstances and the difficulty that this would get you into? And if the person says, no, I didn't realize, I would not have taken the vow, that is considered a basis, a petach, and we say, mutarim lachem. However, now we're talking about a different case of a minor daughter or a wife, in which case the father or husband have the right to mefer the neder, says mufar lach, to annul the vow, and say, no, this is from now on, this is an invalid vow. All right, what are the circumstances in which one can or cannot undo a vow? So the Mishnah teaches, Na'ara ha'me'orasa avia u'ba'ala meferin nedareha. Now it's already assuming that you know a lot of things. That a father has a right to annul the vow of his daughter when she's a minor. Not talking about when she's 6, because then she has no dot, or making a vow doesn't matter. We're talking about when she already has some mind that she can make an applicable vow, figure like 11 years old, and continuing on to while she's a ne'ara, which is from 12 to 12 and a half. So figure from around 11 years old to 12 and a half years old, again depending specifically on biological development. The father, if he hears the daughter make a vow, he can decide whether to allow the vow to continue or say, that's not a good vow, right? It's no good, I'm undoing it. That's the father's right. Now, separately, a husband also has a right to undo the vows of his wife, particularly when they have to do with the relationship. So if the wife says, I refuse to drink wine, and the husband says, oh, I don't like that. I want to be able to go to to go out and drink wine with you. And so this is impinging on our marriage. And so the husband can say, no, this vow that you made, as long as he annuls it on the very same day that he hears about it, then he can annul that vow. All right, so that's the right of a husband that lasts throughout their marriage. What we're dealing with in this Mishnah is the in-between stage, when she is me'oreset, when he did kiddushin to her, but in those days they would do kiddushin many months before they did the actual nisuin. So the bride and groom are not living together yet. The bride is still in her father's house. So if she makes a vow while she's in her father's house, on the one hand, she's under her father's jurisdiction. She is a 12-year-old. And so the father should have the right. On the other hand, she is already betrothed, which is almost married to her husband, and so she's under her husband's jurisdiction. So which one is it? The Mishnah teaches that aviha u'ba'ala meferin nedareha, the father and the husband. Now you could read this, the father or the husband, and the Gemara will deal with that, right? But we're going to see that it has to mean both the father and the husband have to agree, and both of them have to annul it in order for the vow to be annulled. Neither one has the right to do it alone. And that's what the next clause says. Hefer ha'av velo hefer ha'ba'al. Hefer ha'ba'al velo hefer ha'av. Eno mufar ve'en tzarich lomar shekiyem echad mehem. If only the father nullifies the vow and not the husband, or only the husband does and not the father, then the vow is not annulled, right? She continues to be prohibited in whatever she said. And certainly, if one of the parties ratified the vow, there's a new concept, that not only can one of them nullify the vow, then it will be nullified. If they say nothing, then it continues on as it is. But they can also actually do an opposite of nullification and actually ratify the vow. They can say, I agree to that vow, right? A father hears his daughter say, I vow I'm not going to use social media anymore. The father says, good idea. I like that vow. I support you 100%. Right? In that case, that will be the opposite of a nullification. And so certainly with the end of the Mishnah is saying, if let's say she says something like that, I'm not going to use social media, and the father says that's a good vow, and the husband, right, the groom says, oh no, I don't like that vow, I want to be able to text my future bride, my future wife, and this is going to impinge on my marriage. I don't like this. So in that case, well, all the more so, the husband would not be able to undo it, because not only did the father not nullify it, he actually ratified it. And so that would preclude the husband from annulling the vow. All right, that's the Mishnah. Gemara is going to first analyze why we need every clause of the Mishnah, and then we're going to look for the source of this law in the Torah. So first we analyze the structure. Hainu resha aviha uba'ala mefirin nedareha. Why do you need the second clause in the Mishnah that says, right, the first clause, remember, is that the father and the husband both have to agree to nullify it. Second clause is if the father did it but not the husband, or the husband not the father, then it's not nullified. Well, I know that already from the first clause that says that the father and the husband both have to be there to annul it. Or if I only had the first clause, it's possible to read ubala, the vavs in the Mishnah often mean or, this or that. So I might have read it or, that's why I need the second clause to clarify that, no, not either or, you need both the father and the groom. Good. ואין צריך לומר שקיים אחד מהן. למה לי למיתנה? השתא יש לומר הפר זה בלא זה ולא כלום, כי הם אחד מהם, למה לי צריכה למתנה? Now we wonder, why do we need the third clause that en tzarich lomar? Actually, the structure of the Mishnah already said, I don't even need to tell you this. But even though it said, I don't need to tell you this, still we're wondering, so why did you tell me that? If in a case where, let's say the husband, in my using texting example, right? The husband says, I annul this vow, I don't like that, you're not going to use texting. But if in the case where the father is quiet, it doesn't say anything, then the vow stands because the husband alone can't do it. Then all the more so if the father said, I ratify that vow, I like that vow, right? Then all the more so that the husband cannot do it, right? Do you need to say this? That one cannot do without the other. If even when they're quiet they can't. Certainly, if they actually ratified it, do you need to tell me that the husband alone can't do it, or the other way around would be true also? And the answer is, כי צריך כגון דאפר אחד מהן וקיים אחד, וחזר מקיים ונשאל על הקמתו. מהו דתמה, מאי דאוקה האקרה, כמשמע לן, דמפירין שניהם בבת אחת. Oh, I need it for the following case. For example, if she made a vow, I'm not gonna text, I'm not gonna use social media, and the husband said, hefer, no good, I don't like that vow. But the father said, I ratify that. Afterwards, the father says, I ratify, that's a good vow. But then the father thought about it again and said, you know what, eventually my daughter's going to move out of the house and I'm not going to see her to talk to her all the time. I want to be able to text her also. I undo my ratification. You can undo a ratification too, just like you can undo a vow. He'll go to a chacham and says, I ratified her vow, but I feel bad about that. I didn't want to ratify her vow. So I might have thought that which he ratified now is undone. And now we'll have an actual nullification. Since the husband, he's the first one that acted, he already nullified it. So that's already there on the books. And then the father ratified it, but then undid his ratification, which is equivalent to a nullification or uprooting of it. And therefore now you have both of them uprooted it. I might have thought that that's valid. That's why the last phrase comes to teach me that both of them have to nullify it at the same time. Now this doesn't mean literally they have to come in together and say at the same time, we both nullify it. It just means that one of them can't nullify it at a time when the other ratifies it, right? The other one ratifying it kind of undoes the nullification. And so since once the father ratifies it, that nullification of the husband is no longer on the books, so to speak, right? It kind of breaks it. Then, when the father says, I changed my mind, I want to nullify it, the husband would have to come back again and say, oh, I nullify it again, so that they'll both be at the same time. That's the point, that they have to be in sequence, one right after the other, or at the same time. The father and the husband have to say, we nullify it. If either of them, in the meantime, says, I ratify it, then that undoes a previous nullification. That's what the third clause is coming to teach. Okay, this is doesn't seem to be the peshat of the Mishnah, which does seem to be en tzarich lomar. This is letting you know, right? Oftentimes the Mishnah uses this. Here's one law of en tzarich lomar, and certainly I don't have to tell you the other law. So often it does say that, but I think the Gemara here is reading in another chidush from the third phrase in order to teach us this very law, right? Because otherwise we wouldn't know about the ratification and how ratification can affect or undo a prior nullification, and the fact that you can undo a ratification. So these are all interesting halachot that the Gemara is developing from the Mishnah and backing up, reading into the Mishnah so that we can connect. It's kind of like an asmachta that the rabbis make to Pesukim. Sometimes they also make with the Mishnah. All right, and now we're going to deal with the question of how do we know this? All right, this section is a little bit difficult to follow because the derivation does not line up with the pshat. So therefore, it's worth taking a couple of minutes to read the Peshat, and then we'll appreciate how this Midrash Halacha layers on top of the Peshat. If you're not so familiar with these Pesukim, I recommend you pause and go look at Bimidbar chapter 30, the beginning of Parashat Matot. It's a short chapter. Read it in Hebrew, in English, in Sefaria, anywhere you get your Tanakh. And what you'll see, we'll review it here quickly, is that there are pretty much three clauses in this perek. The first one is a woman who makes a neder bebet aviha, while she's in her father's house, bin urah. So she's a minor, right? Let's say around 12, and she's living in her father's house. So in the Peshat, it sounds like she is not married, and the father hears it. And he's quiet. If he's quiet and doesn't say anything, then the vow continues. It's a valid vow. But if imheni avihaota, if the father restrains her, he says, no, I don't like that vow, on the day that he hears it, then the vow will not stand. He can undo the vow. Okay, so that's case number one. A father can annul a minor daughter's vows. Simple case. The second case is, if she is with a man, meaning married. The Gemara is going to say tiyeh means kiddushin and not nisuin. All right, we'll see about that. We understand the midrash because the third case is going to be v'im bet ishah nadara, if she actually is in her father's house. So there is basis for the midrash to make this distinction between kiddushin and nisuin here. Okay, but in simple peshat, here's what this case is coming to add. At the time of the marriage, whatever, not clear what stage, kiddushin or nisuin or something in between, at some time at the beginning of the marriage, shama isha b'yom shom'o v'cherish la, and she had made vows beforehand, and now her husband, isha, her husband, on the day that he hears that she had made vows before, then ביום שמוע אישה יני אותה, ואפן נדרה שעליה, ותוספתה שעשה עכשיו, Hashem יסלח לה. If the husband hears about that and says, oh, she made that vow before we got married, I don't like that vow, he has a right to undo it on that day. If he waits and a week later, then no longer can he undo the vow. So in the simple reading, this is talking about a husband at some stage in the beginning of the marriage. So it could be kiddushin, could be nisuin, it's not so clear, but the point is, it's at the very beginning of the marriage, and the husband hears that his wife made a vow, let's say while she was in her father's house, she made a vow she's not going to drink wine, right? And the father was said, "Oh, that's a good vow. I don't want my daughter to drink wine." But then once they're married, the husband, they're married for a few days, and the husband said, "Hey, let's have a drink of wine together." She says, "Oh, I made a vow against drinking wine." And the husband says, "What? I didn't know about that. I don't like that vow." She can undo it. He can undo it, even though she made it beforehand. So the second clause is talking about a husband who can annul his wife's vows made before marriage whenever he hears it after marriage, at the beginning of the marriage. Okay, that's the second clause. The midrash that we're going to see is not going to agree with this law, and is going to say, no, the husband cannot undo a vow that she made before the marriage. Okay, but this is the simple reading. Now, in the Peshat, the third is, in Bet Isha Nadara, this is if she made a vow while she's married, while she's in her husband's house, she makes a vow, and if the husband hears about it and is quiet, then it stands. And if he decides to undo it on that day, then it's undone. So this is talking about when a husband can annul a wife's vows made during marriage, right? So it seems pretty clear, right? It's 3 different stages. At the first stage, when she's unmarried, at home, the father, and she's a minor, the father can annul it. When they first get married, and then the husband can undo vows that she had made in her father's house. And once they are married, the husband can annul any wife that she makes during the marriage. That's the 3 stages. However, the Gemara is not going to, is going to take it in a different direction. Let's see. So what we're looking for is a derivation for the Mishnah that a father and a husband both have to annul a vow while she is me'oreset, when they did Kiddushin, but before Nisu'in, when she is still living in her father's house. Where do we see that? As you can see, it's not very clear. It's not explicit in the Pesukim, as we just read them. So this is a good question. How are we going to learn this? Minelan amar Rabba amar Kera ve'im hayot tiye leish undareha aleha mikan nada mo'asa she'abio ba'ala mefirin nedareha. So we're going to learn it from this pasuk, which is the beginning of the second clause, and we say from here, na'ara me'orasa, a minor who is engaged to be married, or basically the first stage of marriage, which is almost married. The father and the husband both need to be there in order to undo the vow. How are they reading these Pesukim? So they're reading it, as we're going to see, as follows. The first clause is talking about, says that a father can annul his minor daughter's vows. And this doesn't say whether she is me'orasa or not me'orasa. So the rabbis are going to, this midrash is going to take the first clause to mean that a father needs to be there to annul the vow as long as she's a minor, whether she is me'orasa or not me'orasa, as long as she is bebet aviha. Anytime she is living in her father's house, whether she's single or me'orasa, the father has to annul the vow. Okay, so this is already different from the Peshat, right? Even if she's me'oreset, the father does it. That's the first clause. And the second says that the husband has to be there to annul the vow. So we're reading this midrash is reading this as a betrothed minor requires the father also, the father and the husband. The father I know from clause 1, and this is adding that the husband also. Okay, so you see it doesn't say that she is in Bet Isha, right? So we assume she's still in Bet Aviha. Okay, so that's how we learn, right? The father has to do it and the husband is from this clause. Now let's see. Now we ask a question. Hold on. How do you know that the second clause is talking about Isha me'ureset, that she's only betrothed with Kiddushin? Maybe it's talking about when she is Nisu'ah, when she's actually fully married. Well, but that can't be, we're about to say, because the third clause says in Bet Isha Dada, that's when she's married. Why would you need 2 clauses when she's married? Right? Maybe the second clause is about married, fully married. That can't be, because the third clause is when she's fully married. Why would you need both? Well, I can answer that and say both of them are for marriage. And I know you're going to say, why do I need 2 clauses for when they're already married. Maybe I need two of them to teach me that a husband cannot nullify earlier vows. This is the opposite of the Peshat. It's hard to see how they would read this in, but maybe that this is what they're proposing now, that we have two of them. The third one is saying that the husband can nullify vows that she makes while they're married. And this one means that the husband cannot nullify vows that she made before the marriage. And maybe that's why there are two clauses. Well, it's hard to read anyway, but don't worry, we're going to reject it no matter what. Wait, I don't need it. I would know that anyway, just from the third clause. I wouldn't need the second clause. How so? Because the third clause says that if she made a vow while in her husband's house, means after they're fully married, then he can nullify it. That implies that before, if she made the vow beforehand, he cannot nullify it. And therefore, that would preclude any possibility of the husband nullifying a vow that the wife made before they were married. So just based on this, only, where if you add the word only here, only if she makes a vow while she's married and in her husband's house, then he can nullify it. So that's going to, based on that, we're pretty much uprooting the Peshat reading of the second clause. The Peshat reading again being that he can uproot the vow that she made before marriage, before the marriage that he didn't know about. But he only learned about after marriage. He can still do it. No, the Midrash does not like that because it would contradict the implication from Imbet Isha Nadara. And therefore, both of these clauses cannot be during marriage. And instead, this second clause has to be during Kiddushin, after Kiddushin. And that's therefore it's teaching that what we originally said, this is Rabba's answer, that the first clause is that the father has to annul it. The second clause is that the husband has to annul her, both of them talking about a minor who is me'oreset. Okay, so all that is one good possibility. Or another, this is another answer to the question that we had before. How do you know that both of second and third clause are not both about nisuin? Well, because the second clause says havaya, and havaya means kiddushin. Right here, we've seen this in Masechet Ketubot, that lihiyot leish is a language that means kiddushin, as opposed to Bet Isha Nadara, when she moves in to into the house with her husband. And so just based on Nimayoti without the discussion we just said about the why do you need two for Nisuin, just from this word by itself, I know that it's Kiddushin. And therefore, once again, good, we have a good proof for the Mishnah. Paragraph 1, it says that the father annuls. Second paragraph said that the husband annuls, and it's not an either or. You need both this and that in order to annul a minor betrothed woman's vows. Okay, now we're going to ask a series of challenges to Rabba's derivation here, but we're going to reject each one. So, Emma avlechude mefer. Wait a second. Maybe a father alone can undo the vow. Now, it's hard to know. What do you mean, how a father alone? And this whole paragraph is about a husband. Okay, what this question must mean is that maybe it's an either or. Maybe the first and second paragraph here are saying either a father can undo his daughter as long as she's living in the house, right? Even if she's betrothed, the father can do it alone. And the second paragraph is saying if they're betrothed, the husband can do it alone. And maybe that's what this means, not and. We reject that. Imken basera isad bet aviha yani otah lamali hashta yesh lomar b'mkom arus mefer av lechudeh shelo b'mkom arus mi ba'ya. The answer is that hypothesis would render the first clause unnecessary. The first clause that says that the father can undo the vow, why would I need that if if a father can undo the vow alone, singly, even when there is a groom, the father alone can do it. Then when there is no groom, and she's not arusa at all, would I even need to say such a thing? In other words, if the second clause here is coming to teach that a husband alone can nullify it, and therefore a father alone can also nullify it, well then I wouldn't need the first clause to tell me that the father alone can nullify it when she's single. All right, because the first clause includes when she's single. Because I could make a kal vachomer. If the father can alone nullify it, even when she has meureset, then all the more so he can while she's single. So therefore, I wouldn't even need to teach the first clause. So therefore, this hypothesis is not possible. It can't be an either or. It's got to be both. Okay, well, hold on. Ema avli ba'e arus, v'arus lechudem efer. Maybe you need both of them if the father is doing it. In other words, the father, if he annuls it, he still needs the husband to annul it. And that's why you need the first clause also, that the father can do it when there is no groom, but if there is a groom, then the father needs the groom. But maybe the second clause is teaching that the groom alone can do it, right? So in other words, this teaches that the husband alone, once she's arusa, he alone can undo it, even though the father will not gain, even though the father will now need an and, right? The father will need the husband also if there is a husband. So the first clause is talking about when she is single, and if there's a husband, then you need the husband with or without the father. So maybe that's what the second clause is talking about, that the husband can annul it alone. And if you say that, well then why do I need to even say that the clause about the father? Because actually it doesn't make a difference if the father annuls it or not, since the husband alone can annul it. So just say the husband can annul it. I don't have to say anything about the father. So the answer to that would be no. If the father ratifies the vow, then the husband would not be allowed to do it. So the father still does have control over the husband. If he's quiet, then the husband alone can nullify it. But if the father ratifies the vote, then the husband alone cannot nullify it. And that's why I would need two paragraphs. But if the father's quiet, then the husband alone can nullify it. So I might think that it's still kind of an or situation. Im ken bet isha nadara lemay katav kal vachomer b'mkom av arus mefer lechudeh shelo b'mkom av miba'ya. No, then I have a new problem, because if a husband alone can nullify his betrothed vow, then why would I need the third case? When there is a father, because she's only betrothed and she's living in her father's house, the husband, the groom, can alone annul the vow. Then when the father's out of the picture, because they're fully married and she's living in the husband's house, would I even need to say it? I wouldn't need the third clause. So from the fact that there's a third clause that says there's some difference between betrothed and married, I can learn from that only when she's married, then the husband alone has a right to annul it. But before that, when only betrothed, the husband does not have a right alone. You need the father also. Okay, so we're back to having a good proof from Rabbah, the father and the husband. Now we're going to try one last challenge to it. Emma, in bet isha nadara, lomar she'en ba'al mefer bekodmin. Maybe the third clause, so this would actually undo the answer that we just had. You asked, the third clause would be unnecessary if the husband can do it alone when they're only engaged, then certainly the husband can do it alone when they are fully married, right? And so this would be, you wouldn't need the third clause. But maybe you'll say, I need the third clause to teach me that the husband cannot undo any vows that she made before the marriage. The opposite of the Peshat reading of the second clause. Maybe we need the third clause to teach me that. No, only, right, this is the point, only if she made a vow Bet isha nadara, but not if she made a vow beforehand. And that's why I need the third clause, but it wouldn't be redundant, and really the husband could undo it alone, even at the time of betrothal. Umine arus mefer bekodmin elala mishum shutafute de'av. No, if you use the third clause to teach me that a husband, a full-fledged husband, cannot undo vows she had before, well then I would infer that the second clause would include vows that she made before, and that would come to a paradox, that if they're fully married, he has less power over her than when they're only betrothed. When they're fully married, he cannot undo vows that she made beforehand, and that would imply that during the Kiddushin phase, he can undo vows she had beforehand. That doesn't make sense. She shouldn't have more power over her when during Kiddushin than Nisu'in. So elalav mishum shutafute de'av. Rather, right, we're going back to the original, that this is talking about marriage, and the previous one is talking about Kiddushin. And even though actually in Peshat you could say that he would have more of a right at the beginning of marriage or at the Kiddushin stage, because that's when he will learn about vows she made beforehand. So maybe only then he has the power, and not after they're married for a while. Okay, but then the Midrash is saying, no, we're not reading that. The husband cannot and never undo vows that she made before the marriage. Those she took on her own. But rather, we're going back to Rabba's reading, which is that the father can undo the vow alone when she is single. But if she's married, then you need the father, that's the first clause, and the husband, that's the second clause, is all about Kiddushin. And the third clause says, then when you're fully married, then you don't need the father anymore. Then and only then the husband can annul the vow by himself. And so this is a very interesting midrash on the Peshat of the Pesukim, but you can see that we have the Mishnah, so we know the law, and we have to find the derivation of it, and there is in fact a lot of repetition and complex cases in the Pesukim, and there is more than one valid way to separate the clauses of these Pesukim, and so it's very interesting to see side by side the Peshat of the Pesukim and the way the Midrash elaborates on it. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.